Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as we take a look at a beginning lesson for watercolor painting. As you can see, I already have my piece drawn out. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. I have a microfiber cloth. I have a size 6 round. This is a Winsor Newton brush. I also have my Winsor Newton paints. Now this is not the container they came in. I'll have all of these supplies and the links to where you can find them down below in the description. And I have a cup of water. Now I have pre-drawn my piece. I'm going to take this kneaded eraser and I'm going to kind of knock back the lines. Pencil lines in a watercolor drawing are absolutely acceptable, but I kind of like to knock them back just a bit so that they don't interfere with our piece once we put the color on there. So now that that's done, let's get started. As you can see on the screen, I have little puddles of water in my palette, and that is for my color. And the reason I do that is so that I'm not going back and forth to the water and actually rinsing off product from my brush when I go back. This helps it just to go ahead and spread out and helps to get most of the paint out of your brush when you're putting it on the palette. On the screen, I will have my colors listed just in case I forget to say them, because sometimes I'm talking about something else and I forget to say them, but they're going to be up on the screen, and these are all of the colors that we are using for this piece. I'm going to go ahead and mix them up front except for one, and we're going to save that one for last, and I'll explain that to you once we get toward the middle of the video. So we're just going to keep mixing these colors, and while I'm mixing them here, I will say to you, if you want to follow along with this, I have a blog, and I will list my blog down below. It won't say Flying Dog Studio 98 like the channel here. Instead, it's going to say JSA Flower Power .blogspot.com. That is me. I had a studio for over 15 years, and that was the blog we used to share information with our studio. So I'm going to share my drawing on there for you. If you would like to trace my drawing, you are welcome to do so. If you're not confident with your own drawing, just trace it. Don't worry about tracing it. It's not a big deal. Some people are really adamant that you must draw your own piece. It's cheating. It's not cheating. If you're wanting to learn watercolor, I say trace it if you can trace it. And if you're not certain how to trace it, the best way to do that, if you don't have a Lightbox, I do have also linked down below a video that I did previously where I used a iPad as a Lightbox. So it'll explain how to do that down below. So what we're going to do in this piece, we are working with what is called wet on dry. The paper is dry, the paintbrush is wet, the paint is wet, and you'll notice that I am using more water than I am color. It's very light. I always told, especially my younger students, I would tell them, don't dig into the paint wells, just touch it. Your brush is designed to pull that water up, and it will pull that water and that color up into it. And you'll see me reach to the left like I did just then, to the left-hand side of the screen. And what I'm doing is tapping that brush on my microfiber cloth because I actually have a little too much water on there. And I'm not rinsing my brush very often during this piece. When I'm wanting to change colors, I'm basically just wiping it on the microfiber cloth and then coming back in to the next color that I want. That's because they're all greens, and I use basically the same colors on these, some of the same base colors, so it's okay that I don't get it all rinsed off. When you do see me touching the water, it's usually because my brush is running out of water. So if you have water in your brush, you're gonna pull some color up and it's gonna dilute it just a little bit, and that's what I want to do. But you can see as we're working wet here, I can drop colors in to paint that I already have on the paper, and what it's going to allow it to do is to spread out and kind of blend together, and this is going to give us a good base for the rest of the piece. Now you see I got outside the line just a little bit. I wear bifocals and sometimes I look through the wrong part and I get out of line. So you're going to see that a lot, and that's how I fix it, is just wiping it off with my finger. But because it hasn't dried yet, it's easy to do. It's not a very dark, it's not a saturated paint we're putting down, so it's easy just to wipe that right off. And we're going to keep that color light through this entire first pass of colors. And yes, I said first pass. I'm going to let this dry and then come back and add another layer on top. When you add more than one layer, some people call it layering. That's what I'm going to call it on here, but many artists call it glazing. So if you hear those terms, they're interchangeable. That's what that means, layering and glazing. So when we get to the end of this, adding all of these colors on with our first pass, you could leave it like this if you wanted to. So if you're following along and you get to this point and you say, I like it the way it is, I don't want to do anything else, then you can leave it just as it is. You don't have to do the second step. Now this video is 34 minutes long, and the first and the second step are all in this one video. Sometimes I do 2 videos if it's going to be super long, but we're right at the 30-minute mark, so we're going to keep it all in one video. But I'm going to take you to the last thing you'll need to do if you want to leave it as is and not have to put that second coat on or that second glaze on. But hang on, go ahead and view the rest of the video. Even if you think, oh, I think I'm going to leave it right here, go ahead and watch the rest, because it's good practice to learn to layer your colors. So what I'm going to do now is be quiet and let you just watch me work and watch the colors that I'm putting down, and then I'll come back on in a few minutes and we'll talk a bit more. Just a few more paint strokes and we will be finished with the first pass on these leaves, except for one little part, and that little part is the stem, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to mix the stem color up for you. I am using the burnt umber and the ivory black to get a nice dark brown, and if you want to stop your piece right here, you're going to need that color to paint the little stem in, and I recommend using a very small brush. You will see on my palette there I have the tiny brush. I'm bringing it up. Here it is. That came with my Winsor Newton paints, the little set that you see me painting with, and I don't know what size it is. I have that size 6 round, but it's really too big for painting the stem. I'm saving the stem for last. So if you're not going on and painting the rest of this with us, doing the second layer of paint, then you're going to want a small brush to do that stem. I'm using the small brush right now because there are some tiny areas of shadow on these leaves that I don't want to use the big brush on. I could use the big brush and hold it perpendicular. It has a nice point on it. That's one thing I really love about Winsor Newton brushes. But I'm more comfortable and I don't normally use a small brush. If you have watched my videos before and you're just watching this one, you know, seeing what I'm doing on here, then you know that I don't like to use anything but a size 8 round. I pick up that size 6 when I'm using a small paper size as I am on this piece, but generally I do like to use those big brushes. And if you watch my videos, thank you for stopping by. Let me say that right now. I forgot to mention it up front, but thank you so much for being here. And if you're new, welcome to the channel. I hope you will subscribe. I hope that this will be a blessing to you. It is a blessing to me that you are here. So I am using this small brush, as you can see, to get all of these details. Now, the very bottom color in my palette, on the bottom square there, the lower left hand side, I'll get it described here in a minute, lower left hand side, that was our darkest color, and I've added that ivory black to it. That was one thing I did. You know, I did the burnt umber and the ivory black, and I also added the ivory black to that color because I needed a shade. I want that same green, I just want it to be a shade. And as you can see, when I'm coming back, I put the color down and then I came back on top, added it again, and I tapped it in. So this little brush does not hold as much water as that bigger one. I'm able to get a little bit more paint on it. And for this pass, we want more paint than we do water. We still want it to be watercolor. This isn't acrylic paint, it's not oil paint. We want it to be watercolor. We still want it to be transparent, but I want a little more color on my brush. Now just layering it or just glazing it, you're gonna, if you use the same color on top of the previous color, you're going to get a darker color. It's going to make it darker naturally, but I'm needing it to be just a little bit darker than that. So the tiny brush helps me do that. You will see in this second step here, I'm going to be going back and forth between the size 6 and then this little travel brush. That's called the travel brush because this was a travel pan set that I purchased from Winsor & Newton. So I'm going to be going back and forth, but this little brush is going to be handy at all times. And you will see my arm, if you're not familiar with my videos, you will see my arm reach across the screen occasionally to my left-hand side. I keep my reference photos on my iPad and the screen goes down after 2 minutes. Now I could set it not to go off and just to stay up, and that would be much more handy for this. However, I will invariably forget to turn it back to automatically go off in 2 minutes, and I'll run my battery down and it won't be available if I need it. So you'll just have to put up with me or reaching across the screen, but I wanted you to know what I was doing. I'm not doing anything secret with my brush. I'm just tapping that screen over there. So again, I'm going to be quiet and we'll hop back on in a few minutes. Something to note on leaves like the one I'm working on now, where I have multiple colors and I'm dropping it in just as I did in our first pass. I have a lot of water on my brush. I'm dropping the color in and I'm allowing it to mix together. That's only going to work if it's the same amount of wetness that is on your brush each time, and if you're working quickly enough that what you already have down doesn't dry. So if you're working slowly, and I normally work slowly, but if that's why I chose a small piece of paper for this, and we'll explain that in just a second. But if you work slowly and that dries, and then you add another color next to it and try to mix them together, what's going to happen is you're going to get a ballooning effect where the water will just push into that dry paint and creates an area you will have to fix later. So just make certain when you're dropping paint in like this that it's all the same amount of dampness. You don't want anything too dry, you don't want anything too wet. You want to be very consistent with that. Now, what I was mentioning about the paper being small. If you are new to watercolor, it is best to start with a small format. Now, not tiny. I'm not talking about tiny paintings. I've seen people do 2-inch by 2-inch paintings, and I've done those myself. But this is a postcard size. It is a 4.5 by 6, and I chose to use my reference piece, just a portion of it, so I can make it a little bit larger on there, but still work in a smaller format. It's going to be easier for you to learn watercolor if you have a huge piece of paper. And for watercolor, to me, anything larger than an 8 by 10 is going to be pretty big, and you're going to need to have a lot of experience in moving the water quickly before it dries. So if you're working on a small format like this, then the way we are laying down color with these leaves is going to be much easier to achieve your desired results. So you're going to want to work a little bit smaller on that. And if you're wondering about my reference photo for this, I do take some of my own reference photos, and when I do, I make those available on that blog that's listed below. But for this particular piece, I like to use a site called Unsplash. And Unsplash is a community of freelance photographers that put their work up for you to use free of charge, as long as you give them credit in whatever you're doing. So if you'll look in the description below, I'm going to have a link to this reference photo. I'm not going to put this up on my blog because it is not my photograph. I believe the lady's name is Annie Spratt, but I'll have her name down below, and I'll have that link on there too. I tend to be drawn to her stuff. I always gravitate right toward it when I'm looking through that website, and you can use it as a website. You can look it up in your browser that way, or they do have an app. And I just like using the app. That way I can download it straight to my device, and it's right there for me to look at later. But take a look, because you'll find a lot of wonderful reference photos on there. That's where I go. If I don't have something I'm wanting to use from my own photos, I always look on there, and I'm always drawn to Annie's work. I love her photography. So take a look at that, and I'll have that link below. If you want to look at the reference instead of looking at what I'm painting, you want to kind of mix your own colors. If you want to do your own thing, that is going to be down there for you. As I'm adding this second layer on to the leaves, you will notice many times my brush will move back and forth, just like I would use any paintbrush, and sometimes I use a tapping motion. When I'm using a tapping motion, that allows me to dab more color in an area. So I will be using that in areas that are tiny. I will be using that in areas that I want part of it to be light and part of it to be dark, but yet it's the same color shade. So you'll see me tap, and you'll also see me dragging my brush back and forth. So if you're new to watercolor, kind of pay attention to how my brush is moving, because that helps you get that color down there. If you are deciding to go ahead and do the second layer with us, then that's going to help you with this particular mass of leaves, because it looks like a mass of leaves, especially this little leaf right here. The light source for this reference photo came from behind. That's why we have so many lights and darks. And the leaf I'm painting right now, it was on top of another leaf, and because of the light source, the part I'm painting is actually a shadow created from a leaf behind it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm not dropping the color in immediately on that little leaf. I'm letting it dry just a bit because I don't want them to bleed together. That's kind of a sharp shadow on that leaf. So I'm going to let it dry just a bit. Then I'm going to come back to the tip of it and add the rest of the color for the leaf. So the shadow came first, and now you can see I'm adding that part in because I didn't want them to completely mesh together. I wanted the colors to stay a little juxtaposition and not blend. You're painting all the way through and you didn't stop at just that first layer, then you're probably going to need to reactivate your stem color like I just did there. I had to add a little more water into it because it had dried on me. We don't want a lot of water in that because the stem is dark, so the paint's not quite syrupy, as I like to call it, but it is thicker than what we used for our first pass of paint on these. And I saved the stem for last because if you are working with a dark color and you paint it first, I don't know about you, but I will always hit it with my brush and pull that color into something else. So I always save what I call the detail pieces, which is what I call this. I save that for last so that I don't pull it into the rest of the piece. I almost got my picture completely out of the screenshot here. I do apologize about that, but we are almost done with this piece. Just a little bit more on the stems and it will be complete. So if you went through the whole video with me, kudos to you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm always happy when you guys come. If you're new to watercolor and you have any questions or comments, put those down below. If you are not new to watercolor and you have some comments or things you think might be helpful for someone who is a newbie and wanting to learn to do watercolor, put those down below as well, because I like for this to be a community where we all learn together and learn from each other. Just because this is the way I do watercolor doesn't mean that is the only way to do watercolor. This, I hope, is just the first of many beginner pieces that I'm going to have in my series. I do have other series out there, whether you are advanced or beginner. I hope you'll take a look at those. I hope you'll join me for some more of these little postcard size pieces. But until then, guys, I will see you in the next one.